I'm James Quirk, Group Managing Editor of Labels and Labelling, and I'm joined by Andy Thomas, Director of Strategic Development for Labels and Labelling and the Labelexpo Global Series. Hello, Andy. How are you?
Hi, James. Very well, thank you. Yes, indeed. Down in the south coast of England.
We're going to talk today about the impact of the coronavirus crisis on the label industry, on industry suppliers and converters, and the supply chain. Now, you and I, like most people at the moment, are working remotely, and there's been obviously a lot of talk in the media about remote working because of offices being closed. Now, one of the impacts that this has obviously on the label industry is that equipment manufacturers who usually be sending engineers or technicians to support machinery installations are unable to do so. So my first question for you is, how have these industry suppliers reacted to the travel restrictions now that they cannot visit a client face to face?
Yeah, well, there's a very interesting source for all this. Really, is the column that you published, regular column that you publish on the labelling.com, which is suppliers and converters can go up onto the site and they can post their COVID statements. So very interesting. You get a real-time view of how the industry is reacting, and of course there are also the extremely interesting features that you've published in the current issue of Label and Labelling. And I think that the picture in terms of the service and spare parts side of things, it seems that most of the suppliers, because it's a global industry, and they have local supplies of spare parts from dealers in many cases, and those networks still seem to be open. But what we are seeing is a much greater emphasis on remote diagnostics and problem solving. And I think that probably before, whereas it was possible for an operator or a company to give a supplier a ring and they would generally send an engineer to troubleshoot. So now they're troubleshooting over video links, Zoom or Skype or whatever it is, but also setting up dedicated networking links with converters. And I think we're also seeing suppliers really leveraging what's been there as a kind of backbone for quite a time, which is the fact they can already log into machines and they can remote diagnostics. So you've got servo motors now on pretty much all conventional presses, and obviously with digital presses it makes it much easier to have an up and running commentary on what's going on, also to troubleshoot and kind of pre-diagnose. So for example, Zycon saying on the website that they have a very close integration their equipment through CERN with MIS systems. A statement from HP in China saying that they used the opportunity of the crisis to really work on upgrading their digital infrastructure. So again, they can go online and they can diagnose. Obviously, if the critical spare part is needed, there are going to be travel restrictions, but what we're also seeing is a wide degree of cooperation between suppliers and converters. So if a particular spare part is needed and it can be obtained locally in local engineering works or even a competitive supplier's warehouse, these things are being done. So it's very interesting to see the way that the industry is really putting together on that front.
You mentioned remote diagnostics and sort of increasing levels of automation. Our colleague in China, Yolanda Wang, Labels and Labelling's China editor, wrote a piece recently about how converters in that country are having to make their production processes leaner and introduce automation in order to cover absent staff and reduce costs. what other kinds of automated technology can help in these cases? And do you think that one impact of the coronavirus on the label industry will be to propel it even more quickly towards more automated production?
Yeah, well, as you say, James, in China, I mean, if you look at the Chinese label industry, is probably where the European and US industries were, perhaps in a sort of in the 90s. It's a booming industry. There have, but a lot of startup companies are using pretty basic equipment. And I think that they were very, very quickly, once the workers couldn't get back from the countryside to the plants, they found it pretty much immediate shortages of skilled labour for conventional equipment. I think what we've also seen in China is very much, it's kind of exposed in many ways the fact that still is automation is at a fairly low level, and we're seeing converters. So, for example, Guangzhou Label has a post up on your website. So basically, saying they're already talking about the lessons that they've learned from the crisis. Number one, the need for backup and resilience, and number two, which I think is interesting, for an intelligent facility. So they're saying they want to see a smaller dependence on human resources. I think what we've seen, a lot of European and North American converters who tend to be at a more advanced level in terms of automation. More of the issue, I think, there has been multi-skilling. So there's a couple of posts there, particularly from smaller converters, saying how, you know, if a key worker is absent or has to to be away when they're ill, or they have to stay away for the 2 weeks. So it's very important then that other people then that those skills can come in and take over. And actually, that itself needs a certain amount of automation in the background to allow it to happen, because obviously people can't start from zero. So there seems to be, in most Western converters, a basic level of automation which allows outside suppliers to come in and to help troubleshoot their businesses, but also helps to make it easier in some ways to multi-skill, to bring other people into different parts of the business with the knowledge that they've already gained from the system in another part of the business. I think we're also seeing, again, in terms of automation, something that Systrade, for example, in their statement on the website, saying that a lot of their customers are, what they say, embracing digital disruption in order to create new business models. In other words, if you do have key workers going off self-isolating, for example, how are you going to collect the basic information from the shop floor? How are you going to really monitor what's happening throughout the plant? So the idea of putting in remote sensors, getting that information directly from the shop floor straight into MIS systems, anything which is not just a question of presses or ink mixing or whatever, but also the basic backbone of a company, how they gather information, how they manage what's going on. And I'd imagine that if there are converters who don't have those systems, much like in China, this is really going to kind of it's got to be on the investment wish list post the crisis, to bring in these more resilient, again, those keywords: resilience, automation, less human manual intervention after the crisis is finished. So I think probably we can expect to see more of an interest in those kind of systems.
Staying in China and referencing again Yolanda's article, she writes that some smaller converters have been struggling to cope with these sort of extremely challenging circumstances. And she writes that this could lead to some of them not surviving and some larger groups moving into the space to fill the gap, leading to increased consolidation in the market. Do you see that happening? And is China perhaps, as you were talking about earlier, with a slightly less automated label industry, is China a slightly separate case, or would you see that also potentially happening elsewhere in the world?
Again, I think it comes down largely to what I was saying earlier about the fact that the Chinese industry is pretty much kind of where the European and US industries were, in those kind of boom times, or the end of the boom times in the 80s and 90s, when the industry largely expanded by press operators, for example, or people who've been working at one label converter, going and budding off and starting up their own operation, perhaps with some small machines, kind of second-hand machines. So these kind of companies, as soon as the crisis hit, I think the point that Yolanda was making was that they had no resilience or no backup resources. So pretty much, they found it very, very hard to survive. So what you're seeing is a kind of a process that's going to happen anyway at some point, which is consolidation. In China, that's been given a real kind of boost, that process, by the fact that a lot of these companies just simply couldn't survive, didn't have the resources when the workers couldn't get back to the countryside or wherever they were, because public transit systems were shut down. I think the situation is different if you say Europe and North America. What we've seen there is a real kind of resilience amongst label converters. And again, if you go onto the website, if you read the articles that Chelsea's written, and indeed that Yolanda's written about the more established Chinese converters, they're really, if they have a level of resilience that can cope with these immediate kind of crash of staff shortages, of a sudden kind of kink in the supply chain, albeit temporary, but they have really shown amazing resilience. And I haven't seen any reports or heard anything on the kind of label grapevine about converters being in real trouble over this. In fact, on the contrary, they've been able to keep producing, and we might sort of talk later about kind of what resilience means in this industry. But I certainly don't see any indication that there's going to be the consolidation in the developed markets will be boosted. Although in developing markets, absolutely, not just in China, but in India, to extent in Southeast Asia, these kinds of markets, this kind of a crisis coming so quickly and with such an enormous impact is likely to increase consolidation.
As you say, in North America, the situation is a bit different, and Chelsea McDougall, our colleague, North America editor for the magazine, has been reporting on the fact that many label converters indeed have been increasing production because of excess orders in certain sectors like food and beverage, medical products, for example. She did an interview with TLMI President Dan Wenzer, who was reporting that, as well as the resilience that has been shown by the industry, as you've mentioned, there seems to also have been quite a lot of collaboration whereby companies that might previously have been competing have helped each other out where they've had spare capacity or have needed some help finishing a job. You mentioned also our article on the website on labelsandlabeling.com, which is a sort of constantly being updated with news statements from suppliers and converters all around the world telling us how they're coping with the situation. There does seem to have been not only a great deal of resilience, but also a great deal of collaboration in the North American market and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think again, if you look on the website, just look at a statement here by Steinhauser, and basically saying, offering on our website, the help for converters who have capacity issues on either pressure sensitive or shrink sleeves. And I think that what we've also seen is a tremendous amount of collaboration on the supply side as well. So and it's not just the fact that the suppliers had an occasional a blip when this kind of first happened, and it was a question of, was there going to be sufficient warehousing, enough truck movements, where we actually going to be able to get materials or inks? And taking one step back from that, were the ink manufacturers going to be able to get all the diluents they need, all the pigments, all that whole supply chain, which is often a multinational supply chain. But it seems that the industry really has come together to ensure that all of those elements of the supply chain have really stood up.
It's also shown, I think, I mean, as those of us in the industry, I'm sure we're of no doubt, those outside the industry perhaps less aware, but the crucial nature of the role of the label industry, the wider label industry, but label converters in particular, in terms of supplying various critical sectors of society with key goods. There was some confusion maybe a couple of weeks ago in some countries about what constitutes an essential business, which might be allowed to sort of continue production in order to maintain the supply chain of essential goods. There wasn't really an official announcement, but it seems that label converters have taken it upon themselves, quite rightly, to declare themselves as essential businesses and have continued to work. I guess it does show the importance the importance of the role that these companies play in these key supply chains.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And so I think this is where TLMI and FINAC, and if you just look at Europe and North America, how this is really kind of where these trade associations really come to their own, because they've been able to argue directly with their legislative contacts, both TLMI and FINAC. In the US, it's an issue because each state tends to have its own separate sets of regulations. So TLMI have been calling for clarity. Also, FINAC, again, even within the EU, there are different definitions of who counts as an essential industry. So, for example, in France, Armour, which produces some transfer and direct transfer labels, has been officially designated as a critical supplier because they're supplying the drugs, hospitals, plasma, blood bags. They're seen as being an essential part of the whole pharmaceutical supply chain. Whereas in other parts, for example, in the food and industry sectors, although those sectors as a whole have been seen as critical, legislators haven't always gone down a path of seeing the entire supply chain, including the labels and the packaging. So, as you rightly say, a lot of converters have just said, well, these are our customers. If you need to see who we're supplying, the AstraZenecas and the General Mills, and then here you are. And so far, it hasn't been challenged. And it's critically important as well, because it's not just a question of getting access to raw materials to make sure that people can come to work for you. But also, as we get past the lockdown, which hopefully we will in not too much time, it's a question of which sectors will be able to open up again, and the label industry just needs to be one of the labels, and packaging industry need to be amongst those kind of key sectors. One issue which has arisen in Europe, which FINAC has attempted to address, is travel between countries. And again, because what we took for granted before the crisis, which is this is very much of a not just a global industry, but a multinational industry region in Europe and in North America between states, interstate. So in Europe, once everybody started closing their borders, it was then difficult for a company, say in the Netherlands, supplying a client in Germany. It might be a pharmaceutical client in Germany. Suddenly the borders were closed. So the EU stepped in and has these green lanes where if you're a critical supplier, you're allowed to use these green transit lanes, which link up different countries. So that's the kind of area really where it's really, really important that label packaging companies are designated as critical suppliers. And as I say, from the work that I've seen TLMI and FINAT doing, really, top class stuff.
There's been talk in among the UK government about how it's one of the potential changes on sort of wider trade and industry after the coronavirus will be perhaps a greater emphasis on internal manufacturing and keeping supply chains, making supply chains perhaps slightly less global than they are at the moment or have been up to this point. What do you see as potentially being the longer term impact on the label industry? Do you see, as Mike Fairley wrote in the latest issue of the magazine, an increasing focus on the globalized nature of business in the world today? Do you see any impact long term on the label industry? There might be any changes in that respect.
Yeah, it's a really critical question, isn't it? Because if you look at again, one of the issues which Brexit has pulled up is the global nature or the transnational nature of supply chains, and we're already seeing now. So, for example, with the car industry, car parts, as we know, are sourced from dedicated suppliers right the way across Europe, and a lot of those components come from them further back from China and from India. Same with the pharmaceutical market. So, label converter, it's really a question of what stage the label is supplied at. If we're talking about labels being supplied into, say, co-packers, so it doesn't really matter where the product originated. It could be India or China or whatever, if it's being sold in Europe. But if the label converter is servicing a co-packer who actually packs that product or breaks it down and sends it out for distribution within Europe, then things shouldn't really change too much for the label converter. But obviously, in terms of the wider, if you like, the kind of track and trace market, a lot of converters now are very, very heavily involved in global track and trace. And if those kind of markets in any way get contracted, so more manufacturing comes onshore, then you can kind of see that there might be some impact there. But at the end of the day, all those products are still going to have to be authenticated and brand managed, really, no matter where they're being produced. So we're not seeing any kind of a difference in the global demand, albeit that'll be at a fairly low level after the virus is finished, but it'll bounce back, pretty quickly. So I wouldn't see too many impacts from onshoring on label converters. I think the impact we're already seeing in China. So if you look, for example, this company Shangxi Minjianyu, which is a converter in China. So they're now saying that now the lockdown is finishing. They're actually they were running at 100% capacity through the crisis. Now they're running at 80%. So, and the reason for that is because they've lost pretty much all of their wine label business. Because when people are kind of in the early recovery phases after the lockdown, people aren't generally buying wine, or those consumer products are still buying for sort of fairly basic products, and those discretionary spending markets still haven't picked up. So I think that's probably likely to be more of an impact on label converters as we come out of the crisis.
Thank you very much, Andy. It was great to speak to you, and we hope that all of those watching are staying safe and well. And thank you for your time.
Absolutely.